Yeah, starting from this year's festival theme, Hereafter, I've noticed a strong relation in your works between the past and the present. And Ulrike, in Chamissa's Shadow, you juxtapose brilliantly your own narration over the narrations of the explorers, so one of them being Chamissa. And these narrations of the explorers, they account for a significant part of the work. And yeah, I would like to ask you, how would you describe this relation between their travels and discoveries and your careful documentation of the area?
May I say something before I answer your question? You know, normally I show my films in the cinema, and I like this context, yeah, where we are thinking about you. I saw your piece, and about all this industrial waste who is left in this unbelievable, wonderful landscapes. But I saw the same. And then your work with these monocultural landscapes, it came to my mind, Ortega y Gasset, Ornament der Masse, ornament of the mass. You know, very important philosopher. And, you know, you cannot show it better. And so I'm very happy to be in this context, yeah. But now I answer your question. So, you know, I have done a lot in Asia, a lot of films since a very long time, fiction films and mostly documentaries. And I always wanted to go up north, yeah, and to see how things are. It is always culture, the culture in the East, they are very close to each other. They have other animals, a little bit other lifestyles, but the rituals are always staying the same. They have other animals. This is, in a way, practically the only important difference. But then I was thinking how showing something about this area up north between the two continents, between America and the Asian continent, where on both sides people is living who has the same language and the same culture. And then I found it is important to go back a little bit. And I have chosen 3 travelers, explorers. The first was Bering. After him was the famous Bering Strait was called. And then the second was Captain Cook on this 3rd travel. And then Adalbert von Chamisso, who was first known to me as a fantastic, sensitive poet and writer. And I found out that he made this travel too, with a Russian ship, with a Russian expedition. And then I was thinking I like to see the same area, and I will be the 4th who is telling something about it. But if you like to understand what is the difference, you have to compare. And this was the reason why I have then practically 300 years, yeah, of the history and of documents of this time, and I myself traveled today. In 2014, I traveled for 3.5 months in these areas, and especially between Alaska and Chukotka. And Chukotka is such a remote place, so you have no information about this. And I were thinking it's very important to go there and to see by myself what's going on there.
Yeah, and you yourself as a younger person or a child were fascinated with these diaries, right, or journals of the explorers. So would you consider your findings there of a kind of a film exploration maybe, or a film expedition?
Yeah, you know, what I said in the beginning, it adds to this different cultures. You have animistic culture, yeah. You have in Mongolia, where I have done a lot. You have it, of course, in Japan. And I was on Kyushu, and the film I made before, I went to the snowland, yeah, in Japan, also very remote area with an old kabuki tradition and older theater traditions. And then for me, it was very interesting to go up north, yeah, where you have you still have people who is hunting with harpoons, yeah, and they really do it from hand, yeah. So I have filmed it, and this area has a very sad story. In the 40s and 50s, in socialist Russia, they tried to bring also sea mammal hunters. You know, they had their spots who were ideal for hunting, and and there were 30 people or 150 people together, and then they forced them to 3 places in whole Chukotka and built settlements, and they brought them together also with what is it in English? With reindeer herders, yeah, who have a completely different culture and language, and they built brigades. Yeah, so they destroyed a lot of things, and then in '89. Suddenly everything was over, yeah, and they didn't get no more all the wares from Moscow or from Irkutsk. And then the old people, yeah, who still knew how to hunt, yeah, they were becoming then very important. And the young people had to learn again to hunt and to do subsistence, yeah. But in some remote areas, it went still on before. So this, and I found this unbelievable people, also old people, yeah, and they were able to tell the story of their settlements and their history like a fairy tale, yeah. And this was really moving and fantastic, also with this classical gestures of narration. And this is, they are all very good performers, yeah, because this long winters, yeah, they have to entertain themselves, yeah, and so you know, when I'm going to such places or when I'm starting, I'm doing working books and I'm collecting all kinds of material about it, all the fairy tales, the historical facts, and photos, drawings, and so on of objects. They have older ones, newer ones. And then I have these books, yeah. And so it is like, and you have all the images. And then we are going through these books. And immediately people recognize their own objects, and they are telling immediately, oh, my grandmother had this object, this women's knife, this special knife, or they have wonderful engravings in bone and other things. And they start to talk about, and so it becomes a wonderful direct dialogue, yeah, and you have no more to ask anything, yeah. So they are telling you, animated by these images, and this is a very good way to go in touch with people from another culture, because it's not so. You know, you are not an inquisitor asking silly questions, yeah. And for themselves, it is interesting to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. It's an impressive collection of memories and an archive, really, that you have built. And we're going to talk more about this in a bit. In the meantime, I wanted to ask Alexis, with the form of a diptych and the suspense evoked in your film, Phantom Sun, it seems like the present is hinting on the past somehow. And speculating of the various approaches and outcomes of human history. And the viewer does not get the satisfaction of learning what this history entails or what has happened on one of the sites. So could you talk a little bit about your way of gathering this information and then structuring it into the work?
So, well, Phantom Sun is pretty much the result of a research I've undertaken in this borderland, and I went there wanting to explore an area which was undergoing, on the one hand, climate change, and precisely because of that climate change was looking at the benefits of it and sort of was looking at all the opportunities that were raised by it. So I thought this weird combination of very contradictory energies was sort of interesting. So I went there with that in mind. And I figured out very quickly that I knew very little about it. So I had this kind of bird's eye view or whatever, like instructed through literature or you know, like, or just news and stuff like that. And I think the thing that really grabbed me is the incredible presence of a very like a past, but that it's basically modernity that lies bare there. It's a kind of archaeology of modernity. That, like, it's a fairly new land or newly colonized land, which I thought was incredibly interesting because it sheds a very particular perspective onto a culture that I still think I belong to. So I think I was kind of forced to understand, like, oh, well, what happened here? I think one of the first things I realized is how little I knew, and how what I knew was kind of already like always a bit obsolete. And this became very much the sort of the drive that made me go back there time and again. Basically, I think, you know, like as we kind of learn to do as artists, we set up projects with very finite sort of finalities. And I kind of went there thinking I was going to make a film and kind of, like talking about future scenarios and sort of borrowing on science fiction. I was really interested in how, I think in our imaginary, the High North has been very much a sort of, has been used on like time and again in sort of, in science fiction or in very dystopian sort of scenarios. But that was kind of really all from the distance. So I think when I was there, I felt really forced to understand more and to sort of, and doing what I do, I think I like to explore places, and I so often, like walked headfirst into weird places where I had to, eventually where I felt compelled to understand like what happened here. And so basically Phantom Sun is built on an archive that was meant as a sort of location hunting sort of thing for a future film. In me trying to, like figure out places, but again, I would need, afterwards, every so often, I would feel the need to understand like what happened here. And so so basically I collected all these, like a really big archive of photographs, mostly photographs, and then some video footage of places. And every so often I would use those images to actually interrogate people, never in real time, but always afterwards, like, oh, and what happened here? What was this? And this process was one of the reasons why, for instance, the text and the images are dissociated in the work. It's like, in assembling the material, the information never came sort of at once. It was always deferred, and it was always like in kind of in different temporalities. But then again, I mean, it's like it's an area where a recent past is very present, but because of the elements, the elements work so hard on the environment and on every kind of piece of infrastructure that you put there, that you so easily have this perspective as if it was a long time ago. Like, like places get turned into ruins in no time. I visited the Kola super deep borehole a few times over the last couple of years, and it's just like every time it's like it's taken, every year it takes 10 years or something. It's a really bizarre temporal dimension there. So of course that's something that became part of me looking at the material and sort of looking at newer infrastructure versus older infrastructure and playing a scenario that sort of tries to not situate precisely what the past is, what the future is, just using this sort of dynamic, and that's pretty much the organizing principle of Phantom Sun.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to come back to this deconstructed narrative as well. And now speaking about past and present in relation to landscape and ecology with human intervention in its midst. Lukas, your film Imperial Valley, Cultivated Runoff, shows actually a hereafter, you could say, that is affected by the results of human action. Could you say something about the area that your project is, or actually both the works in the exhibition take place in?
I also just would like to thank first, to be here, because for me this is really super special, and I'm super happy to be part of Sonic Acts and this exhibition here and being with all you here. So just wanted to say that. And
welcome.
I was like, this whole film and this digital collage, how I call it, was made in Southern California, around 2 hours south of Los Angeles, close to the Mexican border, and it's one of the biggest food growing areas in the United States. It's they provide around 2/3 of all the vegetables and during the winter months. And actually, I wanted to go there. There's the Salton Sea. Like, it's the biggest lake of California, and it's a natural disaster already. Like, people know there will come something like a huge dust cloud, and nobody knows exactly what. And there was a fish die-off with millions of fish every day, which were dying off, and then a huge bird die-off. And this is what I heard. And then, like, I stumbled into it, I saw it, and I wanted to work on it, but I couldn't, in a way, because still I did not find any entry point, and then it was going back to these monocultures, which are actually what I figured out and learned then are the cause of all these problems there, because since more than 70 years they are dumping all pesticides and all fertilizers. It's running directly into the sea, and then creating a huge algae bloom which takes out the oxygen of the lake, and this caused all the problems. And then for me this was the entrance in a way to work with this landscape and to give an abstract view which actually should give you a bodily experience in a way to flying over all this land and these structures, and structures make people happy to see them, but then when you see what it is, and every square centimeter is transformed and man-made in a way, it's very like overwhelming. You don't know how to deal with it. And then I tried to develop with this work kind of a language and to discover and mingle around this area. And like you also don't see any people in there, but it's because there are mainly no people there. In a way, there are a few workers. If you would go to harvesting time, you see a few machines passing through, but then in the way I depicted it now, it becomes a kind of a, I don't know, like a ghost landscape, but still it's feeding us, and it's doing that very pragmatic and very good by itself. Like all the pipes are already inside of the ground, which are watering, so you're having huge structures, and yeah, this is more or less about the region and where how I came to this place.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, really interesting how you try to portray this in your work, as you already said, kind of hovering over it. Could you, and we were discussing also before that you said that there's never a horizon in your work. Could you say why you chose for this specific medium of a drone, and also about the framing aspect of the work?
So the entire film and also the digital collage is shot with a like from aerial view, but this came actually after, because first I was there and I wanted to work around the area, and then it was like just how can I find an entrance, and then I discovered and tried different options, or I was there quite for between 4 and 6 months going back and forth, and then I discovered that actually with an aerial view and then you captive the horizon, it becomes the immersive moment in a way how to dive into the landscape. And for me, like it's also like this playing with. It's very beautiful on the one side, and on the other side it's very repulsing, and this is where we tried then to find a way with this synthetic soundscape, what a friend of mine, Jung an Tagen, made for the film, is like just to like also push you a little bit off the theme, and then the image is sucking you into it, and you losing actually where you are. But in a way it was for me in way start talking about this whole problem what we are having there in a very abstract way. So it's, when you don't know it, you can see it like just very superficial also, but for me it's like the interesting way actually how you can enter and how can you see it. And as Lukas already mentioned before, like this is now one of the first works, or the first work I'm started in this region, and I will try to continue there too.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask about this a bit later. Yeah, thank you. I was also thinking about so the theme of past and present that kind of shows up in your works, but also of this constructed landscape, but also with this aspect of imperialism, because for me I feel it touches all the three of your works touch a little bit upon it, from Cheris's Shadow, where you can see the areas you've traveled to as conquered or at least contested lands. And in the Phantom Sun, it's this northern expansion that's dealing with the expanding of the mining areas or sea drillings. And of course land cultivation in Imperial Valley. And Alexis, I was wondering, we talked also earlier about this, that when we were talking about exploitation, you mentioned that to you it's not so much only the exploitation of the sea drillings happening now in the far north, but also kind of leading back to the past, the exploitation that took place there. Would you like to tell a bit about that?
Yeah. So that, I mean, it's part of this recurring sort of history there. The area was basically developed in the late 19th century, or industrially developed. So it's traditionally a Sami country. So there's an indigenous culture. Dating back to, I think, the 15th century, there was really remote settlements on the Norwegian side. But that was very isolated fishing villages, and they were kind of, depending on southern kings, but they were basically pretty much on their own. It's really from the late 19th century that those places in Norway have been developed. So it's really part of this history of modernity, and why they were developed is because they found ore, metals and all sorts of metals. And in close proximity to the sea. So basically that allowed the metals to be shipped out. So, or at least the places that I've been looking at have this relationship between what minerals the land provides and the access to the sea to basically ship them out. So a lot of those mining sites have been developed in, let's say, the last 100 years, and they have been part of successive war histories that have raged there, like war histories or revolutions. So they're kind of scattered in the middle of that. But there's an ongoing sort of interest in those sites. It's not like they've been used and then just left there as a sort of... So there's still really... so some of the abandoned mining sites on the Russian side that you can see in Phantom Sun are now actually being reclaimed. I mean, it's part of the... I think the work is I've had to understand a little bit the logic of the extractive industries to sort of do that kind of work, and I've done this kind of work in different areas, and it seems to follow a very simple logic. It's market forces. Mm-hmm. Like if the market is if the conditions are good to exploit, let's exploit, and if the conditions are bad, let's just leave it for what it is. It's a very cynical sort of approach. But so anyway, so this area, for instance, the area those mining sites in Russia are part of a concern that is probably amongst the most, really the biggest industry in Russia. So it's directly, you could say, responsible for creating the immense wealth of the country. It has been the case in the Soviet Union, and it is still the case in contemporary Russia. So again, it's a history that is also a future. It's kind of so it's kind of going in circles.
Yeah, and I'm interested when we now travel to these parts. Let's say, so Ulrike, in your case, when you talk about explorers, obviously they also at some point had a potential imperialist agenda. So how is it then now up to us to look at these parts differently, thinking when we travel to them and make works there, bearing in mind these imperialist agendas of the generations and past?
You are confronted with a lot of absurdities, who were produced by the history of these countries. So, the fur traders, who arrived first, they, the Aleuts, were becoming slaves because they were fantastic hunters. So finally, the sea otter, because pelt was very important for them, and they made enormous money out of it. Yeah. And then finally they were gone. They had no more, so they had to bring the hunters to other islands. Yeah, and when there the sea otter were all deaths, then they just left these people behind. Yeah, like they have done it in socialistic times with all their. On the Kolyushin Island, yeah, wonderful island, yeah. They left behind all this polluted and radioactive stations, yeah. So it is really dangerous. And then I saw houses, yeah, where people had left. Yeah, there were sometimes on the bed. Yeah, everything was there. Yeah, and so this is something who is so brutal and so careless. Yeah, it's really shocking. Yeah, so what they have done 300 years before with the people. Yeah. They are doing it also with the landscape and with the animals and with everything. And then you are confronted with all these absurdities. I can give one example. On the Aleut Islands, the indigenous people is Russian Orthodox because when the traders came, who were really brutal, yeah, at this time, they killed the people, yeah, and after 50 years, 70% of the population was dead, yeah, was no more, was gone, was no more there. So then the Russian priests were coming. And a lot of the indigenous people were baptized because when they were baptized, they were becoming Russian subjects and were under a certain, and this has given them a certain status, yeah, and they could no more be slaves. But then the traders, yeah, wie sagt man, ja, stellten die Priester unter Hausarrest. You know, the priests had to stay in their house. They couldn't go out. Yeah, and to baptize, yeah, to continue to baptize, yeah. So the traders would have their slaves, yeah. So it was a whole. So therefore, it has given these people a certain protection, yeah, and therefore they a lot of them were baptized. So now you have the crazy situation that on the Aleut Islands, yeah, in Alaska, really out in the sea, you have all these churches, Russian Orthodox churches, and the religious service is done in Aleut language, yeah. And there are no more Russian priests, it's are all Aleuts. And then if you go on the Russian side, yeah, you have no more religion, yeah, because in socialistic times it was forbidden, yeah. So you have all these absurdities of history, what I found very interesting to show, yeah, because it shows how things are going. And then there is only one place in Chukotka where a lot of mining takes place and where a lot of Russians are coming. And this is the only place where you have a wonderful big newly constructed Russian church, yeah, because this is a new Putin connection with the church, yeah, but this is only a place where there is a certain interest because of the mining, yeah. So you have all this kind of craziness going on.
Yeah, really great anecdotes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Lukas, if I'm correct, or you also mentioned it just now, you're soon leaving to South California to work on a commission for Sonic X, so like a new piece after these two. Could you speak about this briefly?
So, yeah, I'm going by the day after tomorrow back to California, to the Salton Sea. Actually, I'm very lucky because I got an invitation from the Center of Land Use Interpretation, and they're running now during the Desert X Biennial float for 6 weeks on the lake. And I got a slot of 10 days to be with them on the float. It's a self-sustaining float, so you can live on it for up to 5 days, and then we just need like a boat to get like our food and water supply. And we are actually mapping the whole seabed of the Salton Sea, or of a specific part of the Salton Sea, because there was it was used in 1944 and 1945 for bomb testing, and they did actually their nuclear bomb testing, but with dummy bombs. So they were just dropping around 170 steel concrete shells from 10,000 meters and trying to hit a specific target to learn about the ballistics and the fuse tests. And during my research, I learned now that some of them are still there sitting in the sea. And we are using now the float with a side scan sonar, as I said before, to map it and hopefully find it. And I'm making and starting creating work around this topic. So it is not mainly about finding the object, it's much more about the search of it. So I also finished already one work this year which had to do with an atomic bomb loading pit, which is in Nevada and Utah on the border in Wendover, which was a military airport where they actually were flying to the Salton Sea, dropping the dummy bomb, and then flying back. And there is a concrete pit which was used to load the bomb into the airplane. So I found a 27-page long manual which is telling you exactly how to build this kind of pit in a way and they were distributing this in 1946 and 47 to all military bases, that you have everywhere a pit and be prepared for atomic war. And so I made, as a second work, and so it's going, I'm making several pieces related to this search for these dummies.
Very excited for this to see where it's going to take you. I think we have to slowly start rounding up. So I wanted to jump from landscape construction to the construction of film, because in the exhibition, all of the three of your works, they in a way maybe pose as film, but then they opt out of this format, traditional format of film. And I wanted to ask Ulrike, for example, what it was like to, let's say, announce that you were presenting a 12-hour film, like the first time that you announced that.
You know, I didn't know this before. You know, it happened, because. You know, I had all the visa and everything and all kinds of fantastic letters, and to go to Chukotka and Kamchatka, but especially Chukotka, you know, there is nobody is in charge of anything, And when I showed a letter of the Russian ambassador in Berlin, of Germany, you know, you know, there is just the Kalashnikov is much stronger than everything else, yeah. So they were just not interested in it. So, you know, this is another absurdity of our life. Yeah, I had a little bit money from the German television, and then you have to pretend to know exactly what you are doing. Yeah, but of course you have no idea. Yeah, of course I know what I wanted to do. Yeah, but you work with people, and they make presents or they don't make presents. Yeah, it's up to them, and this is something I really know. And then you go there. It could have happened that they didn't let me in Chukotka. Yeah, when we arrived with a little plane from north of Alaska, from Nome, then they let us wait for 8 hours, and they wanted to have money. Yeah, and if you don't have enough money, yeah, you have to deal for a long time, and then finally they let you in. Yeah, but it wasn't sure. But then, when you're away from these little settlements, yeah, where this terrible people is in charge with, you know, they never get any money, so they try to get money out from people who is coming, yeah, and there are not a lot of people who are coming to these places. So this is the whole problem. So I didn't know, yeah, but then you go you are on the countryside. We were traveling for 4 weeks with sea mammal hunters in these little 4-meter-long boats, and nobody is there. And then everybody was very nice, and they were so friendly, and I could film whatever I wanted. And they were interested, and we had wonderful time together, and we were eating together, and we were sharing for this short time we were there, their miserable life, yeah. And we were singing with them, and then you can film everything, and then you come back with this material, and the material decides the montage. This is very easy, and then it was 12 hours. So this is what it was. The television was under shock, yeah, and but I convinced them. And finally, they even have given me a little bit more money, but it was a hard work to convince them. Yeah, so.
Thank you. And Alexis, your work then deals with the experience of time, and in that time, in Phantom Sun, you disregard the chronological order of the work, and also in the way it is exhibited now. I think that's very refreshing or interesting format. Maybe you could, for the ones who hadn't seen it yet, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I think that the real thing that I disrespected in Phantom Sun was the political geography. That was the big challenge. I think it was just jumping over this kind of hurdle that was the political border. I don't know. The chronology was just playing with basically what I found, what was part of a future vision, what was part of a past, and how these things relate. I think, yeah, again, the way that it's organized, and that's particularly because of the format in loop. Like you get what I would call the first part looks at future developments and future visions. Then all of a sudden you transition and you kind of end up in relics and ruins and residue, which is kind of an image of the you know, like the past of that future, or the future of that past. I don't know. So this is the sort of circularity that is kind of in the work. Yeah.
And Lukas, I don't know. Maybe I ask you the final question, but it's also a bit vague. I also don't really know what I am getting at with this, but I guess I'd want to ask also myself, what should the cinema look like if your works are film? You know what I mean? Like, kind of, because they are now exhibited in this way, and maybe then this should also somehow alter the traditional context of the cinema.
So I think when you ask me, like, the cinema as it is now is great, and we should not change it too much. But the great thing is actually to open other spaces where it can do experiments, like in these black boxes or exhibition spaces, in a way to challenge a little bit more what it could be and where it could go. And this is, for example, for my work, very important. Or what I'm experimenting now, I do like lots of times that I show in cinemas my work, but I also discovered showing it in an exhibition, but there I especially want to show it into daylight conditions, because then you meet it in a totally different way, and other aspects are also coming in. So I don't know, like, everybody has to decide for himself where it can go, but I think there is also Sonic X already challenged it and made the vertical cinema, so there are lots of ways like how to go and where to end. But would be actually also interesting what you are thinking, in a way, where it can go with your work, or because we were talking before a little bit, if you have like preferences. And for me it's especially like really being in between and touching ground in both spaces, because we know how cinema works, and that's very important for some pieces, and then you can even do their challenges and making performative additives, or I don't know, like.
I think, well, one of the things that I struggle with, because I occasionally make films, is that there is very much a sort of an imperative ruling over film, and it's kind of, it's this thing, it starts and ends, and it really has to find resolution, which is specifically why I like a format that exists outside of that, and which I think an installation, where the code is very much that you enter and you go out pretty much whenever you want. I think it makes a very different, like the setup is very different to walking into a cinema. And I really particularly like that. I don't know, like just, I think traditionally if I was, like the way that I started the work, even like the text part was really meant to be inserted on the image, and then I thought like, no, it just becomes, it just flattens it, and just moving it out and putting it on another plane just creates, I think it creates a physicality in the space, it really invites people to move around, it becomes more of a, so which is, I guess, I mean, obviously it borrows a lot on cinematic modes and tropes, and it's edited and etc., but it really invites to a different type of lecture, I think, and that's what a kind of exhibition space allows.
Any last thoughts on this, or do you have any last thoughts on this, on to add, or is that?
I think if you work in an exhibit, you have to work very carefully with your film, and there are not much films who are I'm always with my French, so it's who work in both venues, and I remember I'm doing both, yeah, but I think it's always really different, and you have. With this film, it works very well, but this is not a film, you know, you can just see 10 minutes, yeah. There are films, yeah, you can go and you can go out and you can do this, yeah. And I have done, especially with Chamisso's Shadow, I have also made an exhibit, and this was quite interesting. And this exhibit, I made it, and it was planned from the beginning. And I made 4 films in this exhibit. I made 12 hours just of passing landscapes. And there was another, the second film was just 2 hours of animals, reindeer herds, salmon streams, yeah, where everything is red, yeah. They have 5 different salmon streams, I think you say. And then I made a third film with 1 hour, only stones and plants in macro film, and objects and masks, and then 1.5 hour film with a human being dealing with all this. And this worked very well because you can go out and you can go in, and you know, it was a whole context, of course, this exhibit, yeah. But the film, Chamisso's Shadow, it has, it compares the different times, and you have just to see it, yeah. You cannot go for 10 minutes, you will not understand what's going on, yeah. So of course, therefore we decided to make a black box, and I think it works. It works really good. But exhibit is normally different, yeah. I think you have really to think about what to do.
Thank you.